Good morning, everyone. It's Wednesday, November 12th, 2025, and I am excited to be here with you this morning. I hope you're watching this live. I just could not wait for 7 a.m. to get here today for some reason. Not because I have some great content, although I do have some great content. I just was really ready to do this and see everybody. Good morning, Emily. I'm excited about the information that I have today. It's kind of a slow news day. And, so I have to find some things that interest me, which I have no trouble doing. I don't know if that's because it's easy to interest me or not. I don't know. But anyway, good morning. It is new every morning, and my information is new every morning. I don't go over the same thing over and over. And if I do go over the same story, it's because the news has changed a little bit. And I will be doing that a little bit this morning. So don't worry about that. I'll go over, I think it's a slow news day. So I had to come up with some stuff, which I had no trouble finding some other things. So anyway, it is a beautiful day here. The snow from yesterday at this time, it was snowing. It snowed more through the day, but then it warmed up, and guess what? The snow's gone. Pretty much gone. There may be a few little spots, but it's pretty much gone. And I think it's supposed to be a pretty nice day the next couple of days here in central West Virginia. I don't know where you're watching, but I'm glad to have you morning warriors with me. Emily is a morning warrior today, and that's great. But, I'm just going to start getting into this. But just remember that as time goes by, this live will eventually move to YouTube. So there is it's new every morning YouTube, already up and running. You can go there. I'm trying to put these things on, and these will last. So if you want to go back and listen to something, you can do that. Good morning, Sue. It is a beautiful morning here in Central West Virginia. So let's get started. I do have a couple stories that are, carried over from excuse me, the last couple of days. This is live. I don't edit anything, as you can imagine. This is live. So if I have to cough, you get to hear it. So anyway, excuse me. The House is expected to vote on the Senate bill to reopen the government. Yep, it's been 43 days, longest shutdown in history. That vote's probably going to happen today. Now, you have to understand about this vote. This is just a stopgap funding. So this is basically set up. The politicians have said, we don't want to mess with this anymore. Let's push it out, make the decision later. So this carries through January 30th. So basically, we're going to go through this all again at the end of January. But for now, through the holidays, we don't have to worry about it. And that's their thinking. So the big storm that came through, got pretty cold down south. Alabama, Tennessee, some of the deep south had a lot of freezing and record lows. And so anyway, that's moved along. SoftBank of Japan is doing something that kind of interesting. They're selling off their entire stake of Nevada for $5.83 billion, and parts of its stake in T-Mobile, $9.17 billion. Now, why are they doing that? Well, it won't really surprise you after I tell you, but they are reported that they're going to use the money to help fund their expected investment in OpenAI. Yeah, artificial intelligence. Everybody's excited about it. It's very trendy right now, and all these companies don't want to be left behind, and so that's what they're doing. Speaking of major companies, good morning, Janet. Warren Buffett, most people have heard of Warren Buffett. I don't know how much you know about him, but most everybody's heard of him. Well, he's 95 years old. And he is basically an investment legend as far as I'm concerned. I mean, he's been in the investment news forever. He's 95, all my life. Well, on Monday, he put out his last newsletter for his company, Berkshire Hathaway. And he said in it, number one, he's going strong. He praised the good life in Nebraska, and he warned us against envy and greed. So that was his last newsletter. His successor is taking over in January, Greg Abel. So he's kind of finally at 95 he's retiring, and it sounds like he's going to enjoy Nebraska. So I have a story here that's really kind of long, and it's kind of long because it takes a while to explain it. But do you know where the 8-hour work week came from? That's our standard in this country now, 8-hour work week. You know where it came from? Well, I really didn't, but I did some deep diving on this, and I came out with some information I think I found interesting. And so because I found it interesting, you get to hear about it. The regular work week back in the day, 100 years ago or whatever, was 6 days, long hours through the week, and sometimes a half a day on Saturday. And the word overtime back then just meant you got to work more work. You got to work more hours, not time and a half or any of that stuff. Just overtime meant you had to work over your 6 days a week and all that stuff. Well, the story really begins in Boston at the end of the Civil War. Good morning, Deborah. At the end, this is a little history lesson. At the end of the Civil War, a pamphlet came out. Good morning, Connie. And we're talking about the 8-hour work week for anybody who needs to catch up. A pamphlet came out. This is at the end of the Civil War in Boston. Boston's kind of known for being, rebel-y, Boston Tea Party and such. And the pamphlet was called The 8-Hour Movement. And it gained a little bit of traction, especially in the Northeast. But by the 1980s, which would have been, 20 years later, the movement had gained some national attention. And they had a catchy slogan. It was called, and I'll quote it, 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for what we will. Not what we want, what we will. Interesting perspective. But so that was in the 1880s. There was started to be some talk. Now, an annual parade started in New York City, and they started on the first Monday of September, and it was organized around the idea of 8-hour work week. That's what I was worried. Now, I don't know if that date hits you any, but the first Monday in September, which they started way back, over 100 years ago, what we know that now as is Labor Day. Yeah, the first Monday in September. So it started way back on the idea of 8-hour work week. That's where it came from. Union started, a group of unions staged a national strike in May of 1886 on a 8-hour workday. That's what they were pushing for. The unions were pushing for it, and I understand why. I mean, we all understand why at this point. So finally, the government always got to get involved. And they should in this sometimes in this example they should. In 1916, the federal government got involved with what was called the Adamson Act. It was an 8-hour workday for railroad workers only. Now, why did they do this for railroad workers? That's a little hard for me to say this morning. Why did they do it? Well, union pressure, but really, they feared that the union would shut down the rail system. And the U.S. was just about ready to go into World War I. And rail system was really important to the government at that time. We're talking about, over 100 years ago. And because travel, that was main travel, the road industry, the car industry, and all that stuff, it would come later. I mean, sure there were cars around, but main travel was by train, and so they were afraid that they were going to go on strike right when they were getting ready to start into World War I. So, like the government in their fear tactics, they decided to start the Adamson and pass an 8-hour work week only for railroad workers. Well, let's fast forward to the 1920s, which is not very far from where this was, 1916. Several companies started experimenting with the idea of a 40-hour work week. The biggest example was Ford Motor. Ford Motor started looking at that. Now, why did Ford Motor do it? Because they loved their employees? Yeah, maybe. because, well, it was driven by the concern of high turnover because they were losing people and low productivity. So they figured that if they worked people a little bit less every day or every week, they'd actually do more. What a concept. You work more. So Ford found that, shorter hours also included fewer accidents. And back then, that once again, they really weren't worried about the person, just that when they lose somebody, they lose productivity. And they also had more loyal workers if they didn't work them so hard. But the 6-day work week continued on, and the idea of a 40-hour work week really wasn't spreading to a lot of the large companies. But you know what changed that? The Great Depression changed that. Because in the Great Depression, we had mass unemployment. And the government felt like they had to find, and they did, have to find some way to put people to work. So they came with this idea called work sharing. Work sharing, that's what the government called it. And basically it was more people working shorter hours. And they did it because they had so many people that weren't working anywhere because there weren't any jobs. So it wasn't so they were worried about the employee as much because, basically Washington takes care of itself. We'll just leave it at that. That's my editorial comment at the moment. So in 1938, Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Fair Labor Standards Act into law. Finally, it was here, 1938, okay? And it set the wage at 25 cents an hour. Hey, it must have been pretty good at that time. A standard work week at 44 hours, which initially was reduced to just a couple years later to 40 hours. And anybody that worked longer than that was entitled to time and a half overpay. Yes, 1938. Overpay really meant overpay, and you actually started getting time and a half, 1938. Now, the Fair Labor Standards Act contains some exemptions, of course. They can't do it for everybody. Things like agriculture and retail weren't a part of that. So they were basically doing it for the industry labor, and of course, executives, white-collar people, they weren't a part of that 40-hour time and a half stuff either. As we know, if you've ever been on a salary job where you get paid X amount, doesn't mean how many hours you work. That's still in vogue today. So that's how we got to the 8-hour work week. Now, there was a poll taken by Gallup in 2025 found that 40% of full-time employees work 40 hours in a typical week. So they're still they're not getting overtime. They're working 40 hours. A lot of them are probably happy with that. While 38%, almost the same amount, work between 41 and 59 hours. And of course, they get overtime over 40. Now, 15% of the workforce says they work more than 60 hours a week. And only 8% say they work less than 40 hours. Now, this is full-time employees. But there are some full-time employees that are working less. So there you go. There's a story of the 8-hour work week, and it's kind of interesting to see how it evolved. Most of the time, all the movements were out of self-preservation for whoever was making the movement, in particular the government. They weren't really doing it for the employees necessarily, but they were doing it for their own needs, which is, editorial comment, pretty typical for the government. My next story comes from Australia. And this is where an honest young man handed over $3,500 he found at a gas station. Now, he was a 17-year-old boy, basically, and noticed a wad of cash sitting on the cement outside of Fox's pantry. The money had fallen out of a pocket of a local businessman, Daniel McKellar, who runs a demolition firm there. Now, the boy arrived on his bicycle, noticed the cash, and turned it over to the teller at the store without any hesitation. He didn't even consider anything else. McKellar called the shop on a wing and a prayer, asking if the money had been found. When he was told a young man handed it in, instead of taking it for himself, he was amazed and stunned. But who was this young man? Well, McKellar had only the video footage to go by. So he took the Instagram to share his experience and reach out to people that might be able to find this guy. And of course, it didn't take long. On Instagram, I guess in Australia it's pretty big. And his mother saw it, and he reached out, and McKellar wanted to offer, and her son's name was Josh Potch, $1,000 reward for his honesty. And his quote, Mr. McKellar's quote was, "It's pretty rare to find a younger generation having a good moral compass and obviously knowing what to do, being the right thing in the hand to the money, and hand in the money." And that's true. There's a lot of people that wouldn't have done that, and he didn't even consider keeping it. Once face to face with Posh, the $1,000, he gave him $1,000 and heard that his goal was to save up for a pickup truck. So he offered him a labor job through his contracting business, as well as he launched a GoFundMe on behalf of the team. It since has raised $10,000 for the truck, which is just $1,000 or $1,100 short of how much he needs for the truck he wants to get. So McKellar took the other $2,500 that was left and donated it on another GoFundMe to help brain surgery and for advancement of cancer patients. Recovery was a surprise to him, and he said a blessing, and he decided to pay it forward. That's what he did. And his quote was, "I definitely had no expectation to get it back. So in my mind, it was already gone." And there's a lot in this story. Of course, the young man and his honesty, and the business owner who, had already, in his mind, it was already gone. So when he got it, he gave it away. He gave the money away. And sometimes in our life, we have to let things go, whatever it might be. In this example, we're talking about money, and he let it go. But sometimes we need to let people go. If you have someone that is, has been around you and been with you, and even a friend or whatever, but they're not good for you, and it's hard to let those people go because they're comfortable. But sometimes you just have to let people go. And sometimes you have to let pain go and hurt go. And, sometimes you have to let regret go. Sometimes you have to let your past go because it's just not healthy. Those things a lot of times are not healthy. And so it's hard to let things go, and I understand that. But there are times in your life when you have to be willing to just let things go. And so today, my offer to you is look at your life, see what's going on in your life, look for the negative things in your life, and let them go. And let them go. I know it's not easy, but you can do it. Okay? You can do it. So look for those negative things in your life, let them go. Today, I don't know about you guys, but yesterday I talked about making people smile. I had an opportunity to do that a number of times yesterday. It's amazing if you just smile at somebody, how often they'll smile back. And so listen, you guys have a great day. Hope you enjoyed today. I'll be here again tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. with some more news, because after all, it is new every morning. Bye-bye.